fellow senators. On November 4th of this year, I introduced an amendment to this year's National Defense Bill. This amendment focuses on the Office of Net Assessment. That office is within the Pentagon. The Office of Net Assessment purpose is to produce an annual net assessment, which is a long-term look at our military capabilities and those of our greatest adversaries. In 2019, when I began to look at Stephen Halper's contracting work for the Office of Net Assessment, something didn't look right. So I asked the Inspector General to look into it. For those who are unaware, Halper was a central figure in the debunked Russia collusion investigation, and I don't have to explain the Russia collusion investigation. Everybody in the United States Senate knows something about that, and they know what it refers to. Halper secretly, at that time, recorded Trump campaign officials during Crossfire Hurricane. Halper also received over $1 million taxpayer dollars from the Office of Net Assessment for several research projects. But the question is, were they really research projects? But the Inspector General found some problems with his contracts. The Office of Net Assessment didn't require Halper to submit evidence that he actually talked to the people he cited in his work, which included Russian intelligence officers. Secondly, the Office of Net Assessment couldn't provide sufficient documentation that Halper conducted all of his work in accordance with the law. Thirdly, the Office of Net Assessment didn't maintain sufficient documents to comply with all the federal contracting requirements and OMB's guidelines. The Inspector General also found that these problems weren't unique to Halper's contract. This is the Inspector General speaking up on this. I'm reporting what he said. So these findings indicate systemic issues within the Office of Net Assessment in the Pentagon. Moreover, this office has spent taxpayers' money on research projects unconnected to net assessments. In other words, they're spending money and wasting money that doesn't deal very closely with our national defense. Two cases in point. The office funded a report titled, quote, "On the Nature of Americans as a Warlike People Workshop Report," end of quote. Now, this report highlighted, quote, "the level of American belligerency, which is a result of the persistence of Scotch-Irish culture in America." That ought to get a lot of your attention. What does that have to do with the assessment of the capability of us to deliver the constitutional responsibility of the federal government to the defense of the American people? Or what does that have to do with us assessing the capability of our enemies? Yet another report focused on Vladimir Putin's neurological development and potential Asperger's diagnosis. Now, I have highlighted these reports for the Pentagon, and I've asked for records from the Office of Net Assessment relating to some of its other work as well. To date, they still haven't been able to provide all of the records that they ought to provide to the Congress of the United States under our constitutional responsibility to see that money is faithfully spent according to congressional intent and the laws are faithfully executed. While the Office of Net Assessment was busy wasting taxpayers' money and not responding to congressional requests, China built its hypersonic missile program. Are we on top of that program? It's got something to do with our enemy's capability. As a result of all these failures, then, like I told you, I introduced my amendment to the defense bill on November 4th. The amendment would require the government accountability to determine how much taxpayers' money this unit actually uses for net assessment. The reason they were set up. Are they doing their job? Are they following the law? Are they spending the taxpayers' money responsibly? I think I've showed in some instances where they have not. The amendment would filter out taxpayer-funded research that has nothing to do with net assessment. In other words, the Office of Net Assessment ought to be doing net assessment, and that deals with the capability of the United States government to do the #1 responsibility of the federal government, the national defense of the American people, and the second responsibility of this agency is to determine the capability of our enemies to do damage to us. In other words, it's time that we find out how much money the Office of Net Assessment needs to actually do its job instead of acting like a slush fund for irrelevant or political research projects. So, of course, if this happens and the taxpayers' money spent properly, this in turn will save the taxpayers potentially millions of dollars a year. I encourage my colleagues to support the amendment. I yield the floor.